episode, listen to me. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Read, Write, Think, and Code with Sharon and Renee. And we are so excited to have you back. Today, we are going to dig into the concepts around the writing process. We talked about a little bit about this last time, but what we really want to hone in today is how is that writing process so similar to computational thinking and computer science flow charting. So in computer science, we use something called a flow chart to help us organize our thoughts. And in particular, in the engineering process, we will identify different symbols, we'll identify different parts of a flow chart. And it helps us be able to cultivate, innovate, and be able to see the flow of the design. Well, that process is exactly the same process that we do in writing. So Renee is going to walk us through some of the steps that we need to take to really understand the writing process and become the most amazing writers that we know we can be.
Writing is complicated. If you think about, as I'm listening to you, and even just if you think about, if everybody just, you, me, and you watching, if we think about a time when we wrote something, it's pretty, it happens pretty proficient. But if we had one of those very cool like cameras, you could slow down all that, that's going on in your brain, it's quite phenomenal. Like it goes from having a concept formed in your mind, like, oh gosh, I want to write about the time I rode my bike and hit the tree, so you're forming that concept, that memory. So you're having to retrieve it from memory, first of all. And then there's, I'm going to really complicate this. There's three parts of memory, right? There's long-term, short-term, and active working. And so there's a really good chance you have to pull that memory from long-term. So as long as that's solid, then you're probably bringing your envisioning or imagination, and you're remembering that moment. And then you're thinking of it in parts. You're starting to think about, okay, so that's the part where I started to lose control of the bike and then I hit the tree. And so there's this kind of like beginning, middle, and end starting to form in your mind. Then you've got to start to think of what are the words I could use? What are the words I know that I could use to say, I rode down my bike and yelled, ah! By the time you've got that sentence kind of conceptualized in your mind, you've got to actually you have to start to break that sentence down into words. Okay, so I rode my bike. So you're thinking about the words. And then the next layer would be, okay, I've got the words parsed out. So I've got to actually get my brain to go into the language centers of it and retrieve what are the letters that make the sounds that I can use to combine the word. Then I've got to get my motor skills to pick up a writing utensil and remember how to form the letters, the letter formation on the page that the sounds and the combinations go. By the time I actually get my pen to paper, there's a really good chance I probably forgot what I was going to work on.
I'm thinking like, when was that time that I rode my bike? Did I hit a tree? Did I actually do that? I'm actually trying to retrieve in my mind right now, did that happen to me?
Yeah.
And I'm writing it in my head going, to that. But that's so true, because by the time, and this happens to us all the time when we're thinking about, we may have an idea or we're thinking about putting something together for a lesson plan, and we have this great idea. And then by the time we actually go and write it down, we're like, what was I thinking again?
It's so true. And I haven't thought of the word flow chart, but I really like that idea. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I had when I was a new teacher. I didn't consider myself to be a writer because I thought spelling and grammar, we talked through that, the idea. But when I was, when I experienced firsthand taking the complex act of writing and breaking it down into manageable parts, it was an incredible experience because I was able to firsthand experience success in each of those parts.
Right.
So there is something to say about the writing process, and I don't think there is the process. I think there is a process.
Like
and it's perhaps important that we all personalize it. And it could be really interesting if you interviewed your favorite author. I guarantee you they have a process. I think I read Annie Lamont's book long ago, Bird by Bird, and she said she walks around with 3x5 cards in her back pocket, right? And so, that's part of her flow chart. She pulls it out, and, we advocate having notebooks, and writing down, collecting ideas and thoughts in our notebooks. And so those are all tools that we can kind of fit into this bit by bit process. So let me show you, Sharon. So if we were to break down the writing process in its most basic parts, I believe it's kind of brainstorming, right? It's getting the idea, it's planning it, and then it's writing it. And then we can fancy that up a little bit. So here's a writing process that we tend to teach our young writers, our emergent writers. And it's cyclical. We want young writers to write a lot. So we have young writers making books almost every time they sit down to write. So really we think about supporting writers in thinking about their idea. And then we actually give them paper, like lots of pieces of paper, just like you can see in step 2 here. Maybe we start with 3, and we have that hand there representing, because a lot of times, again, that memory, right, to take it from memory to pen, we need a step in between. So we actually have students touch the page and say their story out loud or say their information out loud. So I was at the top of the hill, I went down the hill, I crashed the tree. So there's like a physical gesture. There's like, that embodied cognition as part of the planning process. And then there's also auditory process, an auditory and verbal process. Then we have students sketch what they just plan. And that's an interesting piece here, because sometimes this gets flipped. We illustrate after we write, like an illustration, and we actually use sketching as a tool to help us plan. For our young writers, sometimes their story happens so quickly in their mind, the word retrieval can't keep up. And so we want to we want to keep the writing focused and have meaning based. So we have them sketch the images of their story. So here's me, here's my bike, here's the tree. And so we have them go back and plan and say it out loud and touch the page and sketch, and then sometimes label. We have them adding words to the images, and then they bring those words and images down into the actual lines of their writing, and they write the story using the words they know. But you can imagine it stays really focused and clear on the meaning they want to make, because they did all those yellow post-its kind of represent the preparing and the planning. And then we of course encourage kids to reread their writing and revise and edit.
And so by the time they get to the end, they've had a lot of time to really think through their idea, process what they want to do. So they're really walking through the computational thinking process over and over again, where they're decomposing their problem, they're finding the patterns, they're taking out what they don't need, and then they're creating that algorithm. I mean, that whole process is the computational thinking process, where they're moving through and really having to think through what it is they want to write and hone in on their idea and really refine the idea, so that by the time you get probably through that loop, by the second time, you've got a really good solid story.
So for classroom teachers, our calendar is linear, right? And the cycle we're talking about is cyclical. So the right-hand picture is an example of one of my colleagues. This was actually, both of these were created by Jody Mamby and Michelle Bamrick, colleagues of mine I got to work with. But the idea of a linear process that my teaching each day is a linear fashion. So every day I'm teaching a lesson to help kids think, plan, sketch, write, reread, or revise. And then the purple post-its is also, I think, a computational thinking cycle, I think, Sharon, because publishing is really fun. Like, we actually teach kids to go through all of their booklets and find one that they really want to present to the world, right? They want to think about an audience. And so we teach them to fancy it up. They add a cover, they add a title, they do all that work. So that their writing actually exists in the world. Here's another example sometimes. So all kinds of charts here. I really think about breaking these down. So for students who might have a hard time with that idea of think, plan, sketch, could we imagine, this is another like breaking down even part of the process, even a more refined step. I'm working on my sketching there, Sharon. So, my sketching isn't quite Yeah, I'm working on it. But we make these little, we make these placemats for kids, or charts, personal charts. And so the first one is, let me think, and there's an image there. And then I'm going to touch and say, and then I'm going to sketch, and then I'm going to write. So it's a variation of that other chart. And there's a physical piece to it, that little orange sticky star. They can move the sticky star down the chart as they work through the process. So I'm thinking, I'm touching and saying, I'm sketching, I'm writing, and hopefully that then becomes automatic.
So when we're thinking about that chart that you were just showing, there's two things that come to mind that make it very relevant to thinking about the connection between English writing and computer science and computational thinking. I know those words seem sometimes to be thrown around, but here's the piece. The way that you're walking through the process allows students to go step by step, and then really have a very firm idea of their concept and their writing at the end. The same process happens when we're thinking about creating a new line of code, when we're trying to create an application, when we are looking through designing a new piece of technology. We have to walk through the steps, think through it, and really make sure that what we are creating is going to have a purpose in the end. So I like that algorithm. I like the way it shows up, so that, and I love the tactile piece of being able to move the star. When we could replicate that same process in thinking through designing a website, designing an app, designing a new piece of software, walking through figuring out analysis for a particular marketing campaign. All of those things work really beautiful, and it's very simple and easy for us to comprehend.
For our older students, Sharon, we also have a process that makes me think about this automaticity. And for our older students, again, it's a writing process, but we just have students choose their idea closer to the beginning of the process. And so our young writers are kind of going through a cyclical process where they're creating booklets every day, but there's still those steps of the process, right? Let me think, let me plan, let me sketch, let me write. And our older students, we have them collecting snippets of ideas, not necessarily full-blown essays or full-blown stories, in that second stage collect. And then stage 3 is an important one for our older students, which is we teach them to choose out of all these ideas they have. Focus is really hard. It's hard to control your writing because a lot of times you get the writing going in your brainstorming. If we skip this step of the writing process, a lot of times our writing ends up in a summary or a list. So we get list stories like, I got up, I went to the park, I played soccer, I slid down the sliding board, I came home and had ice cream and it was fun, right? Great day, but more of like a list, not necessarily a narrative moment that will, like a storytell, like will reveal part of who you are. And so that can be like you collected that part. But the reason why we add step 3 for our older students, and we teach them how to focus very early on in their writing, is because writing is hard to focus. And we really want them writing meaningful moments that turn into stories or poems or essays. So we sometimes think about like your notebook is like a watermelon. It has a lot of seed stories in it, but you want to choose one seed to develop and take through steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Through the process. And on that step 3, we really come back to meaning and focus. And so out of all the stories you could tell about soccer, what's the one you want to, right? You want to tell about scoring the winning goal, or having the chance to score the winning goal and then you miss the shot, or the time when. So really teaching students how to focus in on a meaningful small moment that can get elaborated into more of a beautiful story that reveals part of their heart and their mind. And then on the right-hand side, of course, is more of what a teacher of writing might see, is each day I'm teaching, you can see on the top of the sticky notes, it kind of matches the stage of the collection. So I don't have lesson ideas there yet, but it's kind of like my map. So even as a teacher, it feels like I'm going through that as well. I have a map or a flow chart to keep my teaching lean and focused and organized.
I like it. I think that the ability for a student to have a process, to be able to walk through and take their ideas and cultivate them into a story is so important. when we are thinking about developing 21st century learners, students that can work in the future workforce, we want to think a lot about processes and giving frameworks for students to work through, and then be able to personalize those frameworks as they are fit for them. And that same process happens when you are learning how to write, or when you're learning how to learn a new programming language or begin to develop a new type of technological processing. So our action item for today is to think about when you're thinking about the writing process. So Renee has given you a really good algorithm of thinking about what, brainstorming the idea, beginning to plan, sketching it out, starting to write, rewrite, publish. Oh, or maybe you need to edit a little bit before you publish and then loop it back around. That same process can happen if you're trying to learn a new tech skill. And that could be maybe plan to learn a new programming language, or maybe just explore something that might be new in technology that you didn't know, and walk through those same steps. So I want you to think about this. Think of that watermelon that she talked about and the one seed in your brain. What is the one seed that you could practice writing with over the next week or so? We'd love to hear what you have to say, and send us a note. And we will see you back again on the next episode of Read, Write, Think, and Code with Sharon and Renee. Thanks so much, everybody.